there's been an exciting announcement about Satoshi Dice. I don't know if y'all have used Satoshi Dice, but it's a very, very popular Bitcoin game, and also the site that a lot of people blame for, quote, overloading the blockchain with small transactions because of the way that the game works. But there's been a major update about Satoshi Dice posted by Eric Voorhees, who is the now former owner. Dear asset holders, I have some very important news to share with you. Some of you will be pleased and some upset, but I believe this to be a solid, desirable, and fair outcome for those who have put their trust in Satoshi Dice. Satoshi Dice is being sold in full to a new company that will take over all ownership, operations, and management. The total sale price is 126,315 Bitcoins, or 0.001263 blah, blah, blah Bitcoins per share. And then they go on to talk about a few more details of this deal. But yeah, he's out. Satoshi Dice is in new hands right now. And it was sold for Bitcoins, and that's pretty cool.
Did Eric actually own Satoshi Dice? I thought that he was just like more of a spokesman, and I knew he worked with them, but I didn't realize he was actually the owner.
No, I think he did.
He was the full owner. Yeah. He was the majority owner.
Oh, well, congratulations to Eric.
Yeah, I'm really actually very excited for him. I mean, I do know Eric personally, not super well, but I know him enough to be really excited for him when, his business sold and he got to reap the benefits of entrepreneurship.
Let's look at this from an industry perspective. In the first 3 years of the Bitcoin ecosystem, we now have a company that has gone full cycle from investment to basic in Bitcoin IPO and share issuance, now to an exit, which is a very big deal, at between $8 and $11 million. That's the largest exit event in this industry. It's bigger than any investment we've seen in this industry. And it shows conclusively that there is a very interesting ROI path, an exit path for companies in the Bitcoin space. This is extremely good news. Even better that Eric sold this for Bitcoin, 112,000 or 120,000 Bitcoin, and presumably will keep this in Bitcoin. These facts are huge endorsements for investors interested in Bitcoin, for entrepreneurs building businesses who can see this as a great example of how to exit. And it couldn't be better news for the Bitcoin ecosystem. This is a very big deal.
120,000 Bitcoins sort of lends itself to some interesting questions. Do we think that this was sold to someone from outside the Bitcoin community, or that another early adopter like Eric in fact made this purchase? And if it was from outside the Bitcoin community, do we think that that could have accounted for some of the price increases we've seen over the last week or two?
I think that's all information that we should seek and find out. It would be very interesting to find out who the buyer is and how they managed to get 120,000 Bitcoin to buy it, whether the sale is going to be executed in one go. So we'll see. You're right. I mean, it is quite a lot of money to put into Bitcoin and move into the economy. It would have a noticeable effect on price.
Those aren't US-based companies. Where are they located?
Panama, with both Coinapult and Satoshi Dice, partially, at least because it's so hard to do business with Bitcoin businesses and particularly Bitcoin game businesses in the US. Panama is pretty much a more friendly regulatory environment. And so maybe it just drove him to the point where he really wanted to get out.
Well, I think that it sounded like he had an opportunity to. The question that I would have is, does this have any impact on Satoshi Dice moving forward? Because, Satoshi Dice, like you mentioned at the beginning of the segment, is one of those companies where some people like it and some people really like to hate it because it puts so many transactions onto the Bitcoin network. So without Eric at the helm, do we think that Satoshi Dice has a harder time doing that? Has a harder time making that case?
Oh, I think all of those complainers should just suck it. I mean, really, this is a very successful exit for a very successful Bitcoin business, and the rest is crying over sour grapes because they didn't make the same success that Eric did. Now, what I'd be really interested in seeing is whether Eric is going to take all 126,000 Bitcoins and place one massive Satoshi Dice bet with that money. On a 50-50 spread. That would be legendary.
We'll be watching this one. I'm curious to see how Satoshi Dice develops over time, because again, that'll be the next question, is what happens after one of these main sales happens, where, a pillar of the Bitcoin community steps away from one of these projects and it goes into new hands. Does it retain its same prominence? I mean, the story is interesting now. It'll be more interesting in 6 months once we see what happens.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com. EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB.
Exciting things are happening in Argentina. Less exciting for the people who actually live in Argentina because these are difficult times, but exciting things for Bitcoin nevertheless, and hopefully an exit valve for people living in Argentina. So if you haven't heard, I guess over the last 30 years, most of Latin America has been having currency problems, but especially over the last couple of years, things have been very difficult in Argentina. There's been very, very heavy inflation, very heavy currency controls. And for many Argentinians, after years of experience with this, they've got a lot of their money abroad. So doing any significant transactions in Argentina involves moving money back and forth. Up to recently, one of the tricks that companies used was to buy stock in Buenos Aires that's listed in the Argentinian Stock Exchange and then sell that stock that's also listed in the New York Stock Exchange for dollars, essentially transferring stock instead of currency. Well, that was banned 2 days ago. One more nail, if you like, in the coffin of currency controls and the Argentinian money, as more currency controls just increase the panic. And in all of this, you've got the one exit valve or leaf valve of Bitcoin. Kaiser recently called it the Red Cross of currencies. You have a crisis, here comes Bitcoin. Disaster relief from the Red Cross of currencies. I kind of like that idea. I think in the last week, we've seen a tripling of the downloads of the official Satoshi client from Argentina, as well as a lot more news about Bitcoin in Argentina. What do you guys think?
The value of Bitcoin to Argentinians really shows because of the attitudes, which we'll talk about in a minute. It could be the thing that just saves, places like Argentina where there are strict currency controls and they're doing everything they can to try to sort of stop the bleeding, but it's just not working. Now, I don't know if you want to talk about this right now, but as I alluded to just a moment ago, there was a recent survey about attitudes about Bitcoin and whether people trust Bitcoin and whether they trust it compared to their local currency. Argentina was actually the most trusting country that was surveyed in this study. So the statistics from this survey were pretty surprising. Bitcoin awareness in Argentina, almost 37.9% of people knew what Bitcoin was. And out of the people who knew what Bitcoin was in Argentina, about half trusted it as much or more than their local currency. So that's pretty good. If they know what it is, they're likely to trust it.
Andreas, I think this is the point that you keep coming back to, when we talk about the other 6.5 billion. The reasons why someone would want to use Bitcoin and the reason why someone would want to use cryptocurrencies in general are much more apparent if your local currency that you have to deal with every day is a total basket case, which I think can pretty well describe what's going on in Argentina.
Trust in Bitcoin is inversely correlated to trust in the local currency and the local government. And in the case of Argentina, both have pretty much zero trust right now. People can't depend on their currency as a store of value. It is eroding so fast that effectively anyone who can gets their money out. Anyone who's getting paid paycheck to paycheck essentially is seeing their paycheck shrink over time and their purchasing power reduced. So this is the main, I think, topic that would be really worth understanding from an American perspective is that our situation is unique here. We have the privilege of being in a country that has the world reserve currency, that no one else gets that privilege. Comparatively, a relatively stable currency. I think it's inflated, manipulated, and in serious trouble. But compared to the Argentinian money, it's great. There will always be more utility, perceived and actual, between Bitcoin and other currencies than between Bitcoin and the dollar. It's always going to be harder to persuade someone here than it will be to persuade someone in Argentina. I think Argentina may well become the first national tipping point for Bitcoin. And the reason for that is because it combines the prerequisites. You have a really seriously problematic local currency, so the utility is obvious. You have the technology in place in terms of telecommunications infrastructure, computers, internet, education level in the country, computer literacy, etc. People don't get shot for owning Bitcoin, so there's no element of fear. People are accustomed to playing with currencies because they have to. All of these things really point to the possibility of very rapid, sudden adoption of Bitcoin in that environment. And we could see that tipping point happen sooner rather than later.
You know, one of the most interesting parts to me about all of this is that this is not the first time that a country has done this, you know, where they put on capital controls. Because again, the point of capital controls is to try and mandate that people use a currency that otherwise they don't trust to use. So the way that you accomplish that is you say, okay, well, people have to use money. So if we eliminate all of the other options, then they'll have no choice but to just use this currency that they might not trust. But, you know, it's better than not using any currency at all. And so cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin specifically enter the situation with a meaningful advantage, both in terms of being a stateless currency, but also just being better than whatever the local alternative is, in much the same way that email is just better than standard snail mail by every sort of metric that you can measure it by that actually matters. You know, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's less resistant to tampering, it's more private. It's, you know, I mean, you can go down the list. There are a lot of things that make it advantageous. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it would be I'll be very interested to see if we do see a rush of adoption, and more importantly, what type of response we get from the Argentinian government should something like that happen. Because I mean, you're saying that this might be the first country tipping point, but I think it might be the first country tipping point the other way. This might be the first place we see Bitcoin attempted to be banned.
I think both are equally likely, and possibly both will happen simultaneously. It's not really one or the other. Bitcoin may be broadly adopted unbanned at the same time. Keep in mind that for many of the people who are rich in Argentina, they don't keep their money in Argentina. They have their money in the US, primarily in dollars. So at the moment, if you want to buy or sell an apartment, or if you want to do a real estate business, or you want to do a big export trade or something like that, most of your financial activities are occurring outside the country in dollars. It's a lot easier to buy that Bitcoin with dollars from outside the country. The Argentinian government doesn't really have much control. And this is what's fascinating with Bitcoin, because up to now, all of these mechanisms for currency controls could keep the vast majority of the population locked into a currency long enough to suffer the crisis together and emerge from it in whatever shape they emerge. But now, for some part of that population, and it's not just the rich this time, it's more sort of the technorati, they have an exit valve, they have an exit plan. And so Bitcoin represents an opportunity for them to say, look, you know, I understand why you want to keep that currency and keep everyone in it, but I'm opting out. See ya.
We talked kind of broadly about how there are capital controls, but we didn't actually talk about what happened. And I think it's worth talking about this because Argentina has a history of introducing new types of currencies. When you look at what they're doing now with a certificate of deposit for investment, it almost is like a new currency unto itself. And so from that perspective, Bitcoin has substantially more reputation than even the locally enforced and you must use this currency has, just because it has a longer track record. I mean, what do you think of this type of financial innovation coming straight from governments? Do you think it has any sort of legitimacy with the people who actually are forced to deal with it, or it's just another thing that's being piled on?
They've seen this again and again and again. You know, a lot of Latin American countries have gone through 6 or 7 currencies in the last 30 years, all of which have followed the exact same fate. Because of imbalances, trade imbalances and capital imbalances, they eventually get inflated into nothingness. I think it's really interesting how training your citizens to be comfortable with switching to a new currency again and again over a short period of time within a generation makes it more likely, now that there is a cryptocurrency, that they will simply just run with it. You know, and
it's ironic. Yeah,
it's very ironic, right? It would be very difficult to do that here, where for the last 4 generations, at least or more, the US dollar has been dominant in daily life. And therefore there is no, just even conceiving how you would do a broad societal change of currency is very difficult to imagine. I've been through one. I've been through a devaluation in Greece that was massive and involved issuing new currency notes. I remember kind of the overnight, by this date, get all your deposits in and then go get new money and everybody stands in line at the bank, etc. In Latin America, they've done this several times. So yeah, train them. Keep training them.
It is to a much lesser degree, but in the US, a lot of people are familiar, even though we've had the dollar for so long and it's been relatively stable, it has devalued a lot. I mean, I've seen these memes go around online that compare the purchasing power of a dollar in 1913 to that in 2013, and it's lost like 96% of its value. And it's very common when you talk to older people in the US that they'll say, oh, I remember, wait, let me put on my old person voice. I remember when you could buy candy for 10 cents and you could go to the movies for 5, So it's obvious that the dollar has been devaluing over time, even if it's kind of too slow to maybe notice in a year or a couple of months. You definitely notice over a couple of years. I mean, I've noticed it over my lifetime for sure. And I think it's interesting because this survey that I mentioned a little bit earlier not only surveyed Argentinians about their attitudes on Bitcoin, but also people from the US and also British people. Those are 2 countries where I guess we think of the currency as being relatively stable. So what were their attitudes about Bitcoin? Well, they actually weren't far behind Argentina. I mean, Argentina was the most Bitcoin aware, with 37% of people knew what Bitcoin was. In the UK, 32% knew what it was. And in the US, 25% knew what it was. All of them had more than half of people who were aware of Bitcoin that trusted it as much or more than their local currency. Even when a local currency is stable enough, in quotes, and of course there's varying degrees of that, right, from huge instability to kind of very subtle, insidious gnawing away at the value of the currency, still people trust Bitcoin.
I don't know if it's necessarily such a great sign for Bitcoin as it is a sign that people don't trust the money that they're using now. I mean, that certainly was true for me. So it's all kind of relative.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's all relative. I'll put my old person's voice on and recount one of my memories from my father discussing his childhood. And he said, yeah, I remember when the Gestapo took away my uncle. That week we had to eat the donkey. I kid you not. It's all a matter of perspective. My father's generation remembers, and my father specifically remembers eating donkey during the Great Famine during the Second World War when the Gestapo had taken over the village and were killing people left, right, and center. So, if you look back at generational experiences, This is why I say this matters more to the rest of the world, because for the rest of the world, currency horrors, the horrors of currency, the horrors of war, the horrors of extreme poverty are 1 generation away. Not 5, not 10, not 15.
And on that positive note, we're just about out of topics for this week. But, Andres, I think that's a really good point to make. The relative nature of history is just crazy. Things can change so fast, and when you're in the middle of it, it's very difficult to tell what's going on. It's very difficult to say this is going to be a pivotal moment because you don't know. It's just what you're living right now. It's only in hindsight looking back that you can say, oh, wow, that was something that really mattered and that really changed the world. It just makes me wonder where we're going with all of this, because there are so many variables in play, so many different things that governments can do, so many different things. I mean, there's a lot of concern we've been talking about centralization lately. There are just so many different ways. I just wonder where we're going to be in a couple of years, what we're going to think about this time then.
Well, one of the things that keeps me always optimistic, the very best laid plans of either the Bitcoin community or those who are adversaries to the Bitcoin community will be laid dust by a black swan that could come at any moment. Black swan is a term introduced by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who is an author, and he wrote a book about how our capability of predicting the future is massively limited because what we don't expect is the things that don't match any of the known patterns. In 18th century England, people had never seen a black swan. They never assumed that such a thing could exist. So the first one was completely unexpected. And now we know that that's part of the pattern of swans. But The point being that you can have tremendous upheaval and change and rapid change. And 5 years ago, Bitcoin didn't exist. Bitcoin is a black swan, and there will be others. At some level, that keeps me optimistic. The uncertainty cuts both ways.
If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news. It's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com.